New videos every day.
Hello, welcome to Psychology by Sandy. Today we're going to talk about phobias. What are you afraid of? I personally am afraid of spiders. You know, they kind of freak me out. But we are going to talk about some interesting facts, so here we go. Now, there's a very large variety of these phobias, and here are some strange ones I thought I would share with you. There's dendrophobia. You have a fear of trees. Or let's say you have a fear of animals and you have zoophobia. Or venostrophobia, you have a fear of beautiful women. Or sophophobia, a fear of learning. So if you have sophophobia, don't subscribe to these videos. Don't push that subscribe button because you're going to learn something while watching these videos. There's sexophobia, fear of the opposite sex. Or let's say you're afraid of dolls, you know, Chucky, then you have pediophobia. And there's fear of moths, motophobia. And there's actually one here, you know, fear of bees. It's a pretty common one. It's called melissophobia. And last but not least, telephonophobia, which is pretty much afraid of telephones. The American Psychiatric Association's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders does classify phobias under anxiety disorders, classifies under that section. And there's actually a full range of disorders associated with anxiety and phobias. For example, panic attacks, agoraphobia, panic disorder without agoraphobia, agoraphobia without history of panic disorder, specific phobia, social phobia, obsessive-compulsive disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, acute stress disorder, generalized anxiety disorder due to a general medical condition, substance-induced anxiety disorder not otherwise specified. Now, let's say you do have a phobia against, I don't know, books, or you're afraid of horses, or pantyhose, whatever, then you would be classified under 300.29, which is the disorder for specific phobias. Now, I do have an interesting fact, which is if you hear somebody saying they have social anxiety disorder, it's actually classified in the DSM as social phobia. So if you hear someone saying that they have social anxiety disorder, they do have a social phobia. Now, among the diverse variety of anxiety disorders, phobias is actually the most common. The American Psychiatric Association reports that about 8% of Americans have a phobia. So that means that phobia is one of the most common psychological disorders among women and is the second most common psychological disorder among men over 25. Now, obviously, not anyone is really exempt from a phobia. In fact, some of the most famous people have had phobias. Here are some famous people with phobias. Napoleon, he suffered from a felinophobia, a fear of cats. Former President Ronald Reagan was aerophobic, or fear of drafts, air swallowing, or airborne noxious substances. Adolf Hitler, he was claustrophobic. Now, surprisingly enough, the famous author of vampire books, Anne Rice, she was afraid of the dark, also called nyctophobia. And Barbra Streisand had a social phobia. Now, where do phobias come from? Well, phobias are an emotional association with a thing, and that's a very important concept in psychology. Now, let's take, for example, sexual fetishes. So someone is turned on by, feet or big hair, tits, the schoolgirl look, whatever. So he has a very strong sexual emotion associated with that thing or object. Now, in the sense of phobias, the person has a very strong emotion of fear associated with that thing or object. And it's a stimulus response basis. So the person sees, for example, let's take the bee, right? Person is afraid of bees. He sees the bee, and he's going to re-experience that fear associated with the bee. Now, this emotional association of fear actually triggers what is called in psychology as a stress response. Now, I'm not going to go over this in detail. Natalie, she's also on this channel. She did a video covering this subject in detail. You should definitely go check it out if you're interested. So I'm not going to go over it, but it is very important to know that this emotional association or this phobia triggers the stress response. And if you get a very bad stress response, then the person can begin to go into shock, or what is otherwise considered a panic attack. I do want to go over how someone may develop an anxiety or a phobia. So let's say someone has a very traumatic experience. Well, the emotional association of fear connected to that experience or thing may become a phobia. So let's say a woman gets raped. Well, she's probably not going to like men after that. Or let's say you get mauled by a bear. You're probably not going to be very friendly with bears either. Or let's say when you're a kid, you get stung by a swarm of bees. You're probably going to be afraid of bees. Well, the emotional association of that traumatic experience will cause you to have that fear whenever you see that object. Now, in psychology, that's called post-traumatic stress disorder. Some people think that there's something physically wrong with the brain if you have a mental disorder. Well, let's say you have a traumatic experience. Well, the brain's natural response is going to go, don't have me anywhere near anything having to do with that traumatic experience. So let's say you get mauled by a bear. Well, the brain's going to tell you, don't go anywhere near a bear ever again. And I'm not saying it's not uncomfortable, it's not going to hurt, and it's not going to get out of hand. However, it is a survival mechanism. It's the brain's response to a traumatic experience. However, that doesn't mean there's anything physically wrong with the brain. So let's take this stress response. And let's say you have this phobia, right? This emotional association. Now, what this emotional association is going to do is it's going to trigger the stress response. And the brain is going to send signals to the endocrine system, which is going to actually make physiological changes in the body because of this emotional association. So let's say your hair stands on end, or your palms get sweaty, or your heart beats fast. It's caused by this stress response, which was because of this emotional association with this phobia. Let's say you take a drug for this anxiety or phobia, right? This drug is going to inhibit a stress response. Now, the drug is not going to select this emotional association or phobia you have. What it's going to do, it's going to alter the way the brain sends signals to the endocrine system in the body. So let's say you have a social phobia. You don't like being in front of large crowds of people. Well, sure, it's going to inhibit the stress response in that situation. But let's say you are about to get raped or get in a large fight, or you have a bunch of bills to pay and your house is going to foreclose if you do not take care of it. Well, because the drug is non-selective, it's going to inhibit all stress responses. So because this drug is non-selective, it's not actually handling or curing the emotional association. Sure, whenever you have this anxiety or phobia, you can pop a pill and it'll inhibit the stress response. However, that means because it's not handling the emotional association, you're going to be on these pills indefinitely. So sure, that's probably great for the pharmaceutical companies, but it's not that great for you. Now, these drugs that I'm referring to, they used to be called minor tranquilizers or anxiety or anti-anxiety medications, or now they're called anxiolytics. I don't know why they keep on changing the name, they just keep on doing it. But this is, Valium or Xanax. And what these drugs do is they will increase the activity of the neurotransmitter GABA. And what GABA does, it will decrease the activity of several other neurotransmitters and thus quiet the brain. Let me read you this. Since about 40% of the millions of neurons all over the brain respond to GABA, this means that GABA has a general quietening influence on the brain. It is in some ways the body's natural hypnotic and tranquilizer. This natural action of GABA is augmented by benzodiazepines, which thus exert an extra, often excessive inhibitory influence on neurons. As a consequence of the enhancement of GABA's inhibitory activity caused by benzodiazepines, the brain's output of excitatory neurotransmitters, including norepinephrine, noradrenaline, serotonin, acetylcholine, and dopamine, is reduced. Such excitatory neurotransmitters are necessary for normal alertness, memory, muscle tone, and coordination, emotional responses, endocrine gland secretions, heart rate and blood pressure control, and a host of other functions, all of which may be impaired by benzodiazepines. Other benzodiazepine receptors not linked to GABA are present in the kidney, colon, blood cells, and adrenal cortex, and these may also be affected by some benzodiazepines. These direct and indirect actions are responsible for the well-known adverse effects of dosage with benzodiazepines. So not only is it nonspecific to the emotional association, but it's also nonspecific to the stress response. Let me reread this. It affects a lot of other things, such as alertness, memory, muscle tone, coordination, emotional responses, endocrine gland secretions, heart rate, and blood pressure. I do want to go over some psychological solutions for an anxiety or an emotional association of fear with an object or experience. One is meditation. It's basically where you center the body and you calm yourself and you control the body so you're no longer stressed out. Another one is relaxation technique. It's basically where you're teaching your body or telling it to relax. There's desensitization technique, and it's basically where you're desensitizing yourself to the object or thing. So let's say you have a fear of spiders. They'll probably put you in a room with a spider at the other end, and your heart will start beating, you'll get stressed out, and you kind of teach yourself or desensitize yourself to the spider. And theoretically, you'll be able to get closer and closer until you're able to touch it. So you basically remove any sensitivity you have to that object or thing. That's it for Psychology by Sandy. The next videos are going to be more on emotional association. It's a very important subject, as well as sexual fetishes. So please subscribe to the videos. I love hearing your comments. Really appreciate it. I love the feedback, and I will see you next time.